There's a serious momentum in the impeachment drive. Tonight, the House Intelligence Committee is unveiling its report on Donald Trump's conduct in the Ukraine matter. After nearly 35 hours of public testimony from 12 witnesses in 7 hearings, members will spend the next 24 hours reviewing a draft of that report, which makes the case for impeaching this president. The Intelligence Committee is set to vote late tomorrow to approve the report before turning it over to the House Judiciary Committee. As the New York Times describes it, the handoff of the report, which will most likely form much of the basis for articles of impeachment against Mr. Trump, will be a stylistic and substantive turning point for the inquiry. It comes as the House Judiciary Committee prepares to hold its first impeachment hearing on Wednesday, that's this week, convening a panel of expert witnesses to describe the historic and constitutional basis for impeachment. Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler tonight announced the 4 law professors who will make up that panel, including one witness who was requested by the Republican minority. From there, according to Politico, the committee is expected to have at least one more hearing, likely the second week of December, that's the week after this, in which Democrats will present their case against Trump. As the New York Times reports, Democratic leaders, quote, are said to be aiming for a full House vote on impeachment articles before the Christmas recess. Amid all of this, and with his legacy hanging in the balance, President Trump has declined to mount any formal defense against the accusations he faces. The White House counsel yesterday informed the committee that nobody will represent the president in Wednesday's hearing, calling the proceedings unfair. I'm joined tonight by former director of the CIA, John Brennan, but we begin tonight with Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you, sir. This report, it seems to me, is pretty clear-cut. Your report, as you understand it, will call for the impeachment of the president.
I think that it's going to lay out the facts and evidence of serious wrongdoing. We're going to send that to the Judiciary Committee, and then they're going to have to decide what they want to do with it in terms of drawing up articles of impeachment, as well as what types of articles if they decide to proceed that way.
Do you find the president committing unlawful conduct, impeachable conduct?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's tremendous evidence of unlawful conduct, and it's the type of evidence that would be impeachable conduct. The founders of this country, as you know well, Chris, did not want an outside influence on our elections. But in this particular scheme, there's serious evidence that the president wanted to pressure an outside power, namely Ukraine, to get involved in our elections by investigating his domestic political rivals. And then secondly, he basically is using the tools of his office. There's evidence to suggest that he's using tools of his office to investigate a private citizen, which is perhaps the biggest fear that any private citizen has about their government, that the office of the presidency would be used for political purposes to investigate an individual for wrongful purposes.
Well, here we are, December 2nd. We're moving into the month where you will. It looks like you are scheduled to vote articles of impeachment before Christmas weekend. And so I want to run through with you when you think, with a critical moment that this occurred, became clear what was going to happen. We had the whistleblower. We got word of that there had, in fact, been a presidential conversation with the president of a foreign country in which the president pressured that foreign leader for dirt on a political opponent, holding up military aid as his quid pro quo. And then you had the call by the call memo from that call. We got to see what was actually said. Then Speaker Pelosi said, this is the baby. This is what we've been waiting for. This is clear-cut evidence of impeachable behavior. And then we had 232 members of the House voting for this action on impeachment. And then you had the witnesses the last 2 weeks you mentioned. When was the critical moment when it was clear that the House Democrats were moving toward impeachment? Of all those moments.
Well, there's a lot, as you know. But, you know, when Mick Mulvaney came out in that press conference in the White House and basically said, sure, there's a quid pro quo. There's basically military aid conditioned on an investigation of the DNC and the president's political rivals. Get over it. I think that was a turning point in a lot of people's minds that not only are these folks engaging in wrongful conduct, but they're also telling us that it's something that we need to accept. And that's just unacceptable, as you know. Yeah.
Well, meanwhile, House Republicans are prepared to issue a report of their own aimed at blunting the impact of the committee's findings. As the New York Times summarized, quote, House Republicans plan to argue that President Trump was acting on genuine and reasonable skepticism of Ukraine and valid concerns about possible corruption involving Americans, not political self-interest. Well, that's the Republican report. It also claims, the Republican report, that the president's initial I love this word, hesitation to meet with President Zelensky or to provide U.S. taxpayer-funded security assistance to Ukraine without thoughtful review is entirely prudent. I love these words. They also take aim at the witnesses who came forward saying the impeachment drive has been, quote, based on the accusations and assumptions of unelected bureaucrats who disagreed with President Trump's policy initiatives and processes. This language is so fraught with crap. In other words, if you weren't elected, you're not worth listening to. If you're a public servant that never ran for office in some town somewhere, you're not worth listening to. Your words now. All public officials are, in other words, liars and not to be believed. That's what this Republican caucus talks like.
That's right. I
like
works of fiction. I like works of fiction like any other person, but this Republican report is absolutely ridiculous. And you're absolutely correct that basically they are parroting the Trump narrative or President Trump's narrative that any public servant who wishes to bring forward evidence of wrongdoing against him is a member of the deep state. They are a never Trumper and so forth. But you and the American people saw for themselves exactly how compelling Marie Yovanovitch is, Bill Taylor is, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, Fiona Hill, and the list goes on and on and on. These are not people who are political. They are career public servants who stuck their necks on the line to tell the truth. And because of that, I think that the American people believe them.
I think they did. Thank you. Some of those who watched and those who listened, I think, believe. Raja Krishnamurthy, thank you so much, U.S. Congressman, for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.